There we go. Welcome back. I am Abe with Mystic Gen Mara, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight is a little bit different of an occult and crochet. Instead of going over a person, I kind of want to talk about something that we've been going over the last couple of weeks. And with the previous couple of weeks, we've talked about the fathers of Wicca, Alex Sanders, Maxine Sanders, which were a couple, and then Gerald Gardner, who was kind of the one who brought the modern concept of Wicca into our current world that we would know today. So, what I will just go over part of this tonight. This ended up being a little bit bigger of a project than what I thought, so to actually give it justice, I'm going to break this up into two different evenings. I'm not sure if I'll do them both the same week, or if we'll do one this week and one next week, or how this is going to go just yet, but we'll get started. I will say this is going to be part research, and I will throw my own little anecdotes in there. I do have a fair amount of experience with this, so it's not going to be just this is the textbook version. It's going to be a little bit of both, so that you can get an idea of where it comes from and kind of how you can apply it if you choose to practice Wicca today. In more modern times, Wicca is also called the craft. It is a religious and magical practice, although there are groups that ignore the magic part and just go with the religion, and that's cool. As I've discussed before, Gerald Gardner brought it to the public in the 50s. Alex Sanders would spread it so far beyond the origins that you can't even say that it is the same, because Alex actually changed it and made his own line out of it, and that's the Alexandrian line. Scholars will say that Wicca is a modern interpretation or version of ancient pagan beliefs. I can't really argue with that when you look at how it's incorporated some of the ancient practices. It can be thought of as a mystery religion, and if anyone knows history, you'll know why it was held in mystery, because the burning times, the Inquisitions, the witch hunters of the Dark Ages, all of this kind of stuff led to what we have today having to be hidden significantly. Even the ancient lodges, where we get a lot of our ceremonial magic, would have to have been secreted away so that it could actually get through that chaos. So, that being said, the basis of Wicca, or what we would call witchcraft, the craft of the wise, is a more nature-based religion than some of the other ones. One title that has, interestingly enough, entered this fray is the New Age. Like New Age movement, New Age practices. To me, this is not exactly accurate. Wicca and the craft have been around for an exceptionally long time. Maybe not in the way it's formed today, but the line goes back a long time. New Age is just, to me, not the right term for this particular practice. Just my opinion. It is classified as a religion, and it's not a cult. Now, a cult can rise out of Wicca, but in general practice, it's not a cult. Most people today would call themselves as Wiccans part of a spiritual group or a nature-based way of life. Title matters very little, but understand that this is actually a religion, not in the dogma version of like Catholic, Methodist, Protestants, none of that. But it does have structure to a point, and there is a lineage that you can trace with most of it. Gardner would call the practice of Wicca witchcraft, the craft of the wise. At times, and I don't know why he would do this, he would call it the witch cult, and in some of his work I've read, he kind of almost says it in irony. It doesn't come across as taking it as a title. It's more of a he type thing. I don't agree with the term witch cult. I don't use it. What I use through here is either the craft, witchcraft, Wicca, or something along those lines, because that is the way that I came to understand it in the first place. He did like the term Gardner, did like the term Wicca, but he wouldn't call his stuff witchcraft or the craft, or he would call himself, good grief, I can't even read my own typing, witchcraft, the craft of the wise, things like that. The term Wicca he used, but it really didn't hit popularity till the mid-60s or so. I couldn't find an exact period where it was like, we will now call ourselves Wicca. It just kind of melted into the consciousness type of a thing. There are people who will say that Wicca is the religion of witchcraft is the magic. Magic with a K, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. I kind of like this view because people who want to be Wiccan but don't want to actually practice magic don't have to. It's not an aspect of the craft. It is a part of it that you can include, but it's not necessary, so to speak. There are people who practice Wicca, like I said, without magic, but then there's others who would prefer to practice folk magic like hoodoo or something along those lines, and never actually associate with the religion of Wicca. So there's a lot of variables you can play with within this concept, which is nice. Wiccans, as a general practice, worship a god and a goddess, the Lord and Lady. You'll hear me talk about that in that aspect a lot. There are some who only worship one or the other, such as Dianic Wicca, which there is a group that is very feminine focused. You also have like Apollo-based traditions, which are almost exclusively male focused. Worship of the divine is a general requirement, but there are some who claim it's not necessary. I'm not really sure how you can practice a path of spirituality and religion like this is and be an atheist, but there are people who claim to be atheist Wiccans. If you want to practice it that way, that's on you. I can't quite wrap my head around that one. And there are people who want to practice magic. That's great. You do the you. But you really don't want to call it Wicca, because Wicca has a very specific basis, and if you're just going to practice magic, then go be a ceremonialist or something along those lines. But the title of Wicca, or to take that term, to me just doesn't fit. Personal opinion. Early witch groups would worship a horned god and a mother goddess. Pre-Christian type deities, the hunter-gatherer type areas. Margaret Murray had a claim that this belief was handed down through thousands of years of human history. Just full disclosure, Margaret Murray's work has been heavily debated. People don't fully believe her claims. They say they've not been proven. My defense to her, the secrecy of this particular practice was needed to protect people from the Inquisition times. So was she right? Was she wrong? I have to do more digging into her, because from what I've read, I don't think she was fully off base, but I do think she took some liberties with how she presented things. I am being honest with you on that one. The secret deities in Gardner's Coven were Cernunnos and Aradia. I always have to struggle with that word for some reason. These were a couple of the names that eventually came out. From what I have read of Gardner's work, there were other ones as well. He just didn't publish that information, so it's kind of held within the craft itself of his line. The god or the Lord is usually associated with the natural world and with animals. The horned god comes to mind. In a lot of practices, the Lord is associated with the afterlife as well. He is the perfection of the divine masculine. And when you start to come to an understanding of what the divine masculine actually means, what it means to step into the divine masculine energy, you'll really start to understand what is going on in the world and how the term toxic masculinity is a joke and needs to be thrown out, because masculinity at its core is divine. So is femininity. We're not going into like which one's better, because you need both. But to say one is toxic or not is kind of a misnomer, because if you don't have divinity included in that, you take it to a place of ego, things fall apart real quick. So just putting that out there. The goddess, on the other hand, is associated with the land of the living. She is the womb of fertility, spring, new life. She is the partner and lover of the Lord. She is supporting and she is nurturing by nature. She is seen as the perfection of the divine feminine. Notice I'm not using names right here, because these are not gods and goddesses. These are the source of that. This is the perfection of masculinity. This is the perfection of femininity. These are beyond name, is where we're at right here. And this is a core aspect of most Wiccan groups, is this belief in the divine feminine and the divine masculine. Have some tea tonight. If that is a concept that is holding that in balance is a little bit tricky. If you've ever looked into Taoism or any of the Eastern beliefs, the concept of yin and yang coming into balance with each other creates unity within the whole. That's how we work with this type of energy when we're talking Wicca terms. Other ways to view the Lord is the Oak and Holly Kings, which is something that I play on when I talk about in meditation with the Sabbats. The Sun, as in the solar deities, the Green Man, forest deities, horned gods, Ceranos, things like that. In some fairy traditions, like as in Little People fairies, he can be seen as the Lord, or the Lord can be seen as, the leader of the wild hunt, and that's a specific thing within the fairy traditions. You can also see the Lord as the Lord of Death, and with that title, it's when he's in the underworld in the periods between Samhain and Yule. So you've got a broad range of things you can look at with the Lord, but the lady or the goddess is not much different in most traditions. She can be seen as the triple goddess, and just FYI, there's a triple god aspect as well, but that's not as common to the source material as it is today. The goddess path is the youthful virginal maiden, and this is the three-faced goddess, the divine, very fertile mother, and the wise ancient crone, maiden, mother, crone. Those are your three faces of the goddess. The moon goddess is another title, and she is seen as Mother Nature. Wait, where have we heard that before? And her moods and times change with the seasons. So you've got a lot of different aspects, prospects, and beliefs all tied into this one aspect of divinity. Oops, where'd I go? Moved one thing, the whole screen moved. In the Gardenian tradition, there is a divine source. This is also known as the supreme deity, the prime mover, which I don't like that title personally, the cosmic logos, which a lot of modern day people use, including a lot of the alternative ancient alien type people like to talk about the cosmic or divine logos. It's an interesting thing that they borrowed from Gerald Gardner. And the other aspect is the Godhead. According to Gardner, this supreme, incomprehensible deity created all of the under gods, and this is where we get the gods and goddesses of every culture around the planet. The supreme deity is not concerned with details. That's why the gods and goddesses were created. As you deal with the details, I'm keeping the universe in play. Even in the Jewish tradition, Kabbalah specifically, they talk about the unspeakable name of God. That's the cosmic logos. This is that Godhead aspect. It's the Yod Hud Ve Ha belief that it's an unspeakable, beyond human comprehension divinity. So for us, we have to filter it through our consciousness to have have the awareness, which, like I said, not something I'm opposed to. There is another view that the supreme deity is a multifaceted being. So those giant crystals you get in your house that have like bazillion facets on them, that is, the heart of that is the supreme divinity, the cosmic logos. Each facet on the outside of that crystal is a god or goddess face. So one face would be Jesus, one face would be Mother Mary, one face would be Lakshmi, one face would be the Buddha. Each face has a different shimmer, but they all go back to the divine core. So in Wicca, basically all roads lead to Rome type of a thing. So covens that only worship one deity, or monotheistic covens, can be viewed as a bit controversial. I was digging through this trying to sort out like where the controversy kicked in, and it literally started from day one. The detractors and Gerald Gardner and a lot of the people coming out of his line were against this particular practice because they claimed the covens were trying to mimic Christianity. I don't quite buy that because you're leaving something, why would you drag it with you type of a thing. But I will say this, when you work, and this is my part of the reason that I started questioning things as I was growing up, is I felt like there was something missing. There was a balance that wasn't at play here. And that's how I view the single deity practices, is you're not working fully with balance. Like the Dianic covens, you're very focused on the feminine. That's awesome, but are you bringing in the more masculine aspects? The goddess Diana actually does have a lot of masculine qualities, but are you bringing that into play? That's how I look at this. I don't quite see it as mimicking Christianity, because people who tend to find Wicca, it's not because they are going to bring Christianity with them, it's the fact that it doesn't fit their beliefs, it doesn't fit something deep down inside, and so they're trying to find something where they fit, they understand. The beliefs have a way to express themselves easier to understand. That's not to say that Wicca is easy to understand, but some people resonate very strongly with it, and that's why they have went this direction. This is where we get into that borderline to full atheistic view of the divine. And this is where I start to scratch my head with these people. They see, the people who are more atheistic in views of Wicca, see the divine, the gods and goddesses, as Jungian archetypes, Carl Jung-based archetypes. I do not personally agree with this. I've looked into it enough to be like, no, sorry. This view holds that every god and goddess are aspects of the consciousness, your mind, that manifest in ritual when the proper mindset is achieved. You're literally taking the divine and making it a computer program. Like I said, I'm not really sure how you fit that into a religion. That's like worshiping Windows 95. It doesn't fit into how I see the divine, but that's, again, people want to practice that way, that's that's on them. The other side of Wicca is not just dualistic, god and goddess. It can also be seen as very polytheistic, where some covens or groups will work with a specific sect of deities, such as there are Greek covens, there are Egyptian-based covens, there are even Roman covens, which are like Mars, Jupiter, Venus. That's all the Martian, that's all the Roman deities. So you have covens that go into groups of belief. These sets, or this sets the practitioners, the witches, everyday coven goers, up with the variety of deities to work with under the banner of their chosen sect within the coven. You can work with Zeus, while your coven mate works with Hera, and another one within the same group works with Poseidon, because you're all dealing with the Greek pantheon. Let's say we were in an Egyptian one. I can work with Isis, you can work with Horus, and our friend over there can work with Anubis, all within the Egyptian practice. The options within this group are fairly boundless. You don't have a lot of boundaries outside of the group that you're, the pantheon that you're working with. And then if you bounce over and start adding in Hindu deities, well, you can go up to 1,000 of those. So it literally is, your options are pretty broad there. There are those who follow the belief put forward by Dion Fortune, which I have to, in a lot of ways I like how she views it. All gods are one god. They all go back to one divine masculine source. All goddesses are one goddess. They all go back to one divine feminine source. Basically, each name is our way of understanding the divine source of the masculine and the feminine into the physical world. Under this banner, the eclectic path has taken form. The eclectic path, this is where a lot of people today are like, where are the rules? You can throw some of these out, not all of them, but some of these rules you can just pitch. So you can worship Isis as your goddess, and Apollo as your god, Aphrodite as your goddess, and Ganesha as your god, Osiris and Freya. You can even, under this banner, and this is where we get some of our interesting mixes today, add in saints and Christian beliefs. You can have Mother Mary working alongside Horus. You can have Jesus the Christ working alongside Lakshmi. I personally, personal opinion here, don't like to mix the Christian belief system into the pagan one, mainly because you start getting into some conflicting viewpoints, and then you start getting into a little bit of hostility with people saying, well, you're just bastardizing our religion. Everyone has stolen from every other religion on the planet, but there are, to me, certain things that shouldn't be mixed, and this is one of those areas. It is an option, just putting it out there, not one that I personally like to do. But this expansion into the polytheistic has created a hodgepodge upon the path of the witch. So you really get into some interesting chaos in that one. Like I said, there's certain things where it's just almost better to not mix, just because the energies can be really unbalanced with each other. So again, you can do what you feel is right. I personally don't agree with mixing all of that together. So within the polytheistic view, there is a form of animism, and this is something that's joined the ranks in the last 30 years, 30, 40 years or so. And this is kind of like a shamanistic view that's been brought into this practice. And it goes, the world in which we live is full of spirits as well as spiritual beings. The spirits are in each animal, plant, crystal, and stone. Also within the 4 primary elements. And the fairies will, this is kind of where the fairies mix into this whole situation, as well as the genus Loki or Loci, which is the protective spirits of a land or place. So there is a genius of North America, there's a genius of Idaho, there's a genius of Montana, there's a genius of California. That's where you're getting into these kind of spirits, but you also have angels that come into play under the animism banner. So over the years, Wicca has went from this window to this really massive expanse of spirituality and how each person chooses to bring it forward. Most Wiccans, as I spoke earlier, believe in and use magic. And to separate it, if you ever see it written, when you see magic with a K, they're talking about the definitions I'm about to go over, if you just see magic with just a C, they generally are implying illusionary magic, stage magicians, things like that. So what we're talking about is not the theatrical, illusionary stage magician stuff. We are talking about magic as defined by Aleister Crowley, the science and art of causing change in accordance with will. There's a whole bunch that goes along with that, but we're going to leave it there. The other definition that is pretty common is the one put forward by S.L. MacGregor Mathers, which is magic is the science of the control of the secret forces of nature. Either way you want to look at it, the practice is considered to be an art and a science. You can have a great deal of freedom in how you use this form of magic, but there are basic laws that you should follow so that things don't blow up in your face. Some believe that magic is using all 5 senses of the human experience to their fullest ability, thus causing change in accordance with capital W will. Capital W will, when I say it like reference the will, what we're talking about, this is the divine will. This is your higher self will. This is not the will of, but I want it. This is the will of what would be the best outcome for the situation. Not for you personally, but overall. And that's when we start getting into a higher frequency of belief and practice. Others believe that magic is a lost science that we are just now starting to rediscover, allowing us to change the concept and the fabric of reality itself. That is a pretty cool concept on its own. Like, being able to think about it in the fact that we have this ability within us to actually shift reality. And when you start looking back at some of the stuff that happened in history, how they, with no technology, it was the Stone Agers, and they were out there with sticks carving concrete or granite and making these amazing monoliths, really with a stick? Or was there something else at play? Something that we've forgotten. We've been forced to forget. And through some of these ancient practices, are we being able to rediscover it? That's a topic for another day, but this is something that is viable within the magical and Wiccan community. So how do Wiccans go about using this art and science as well as practicing rituals? In most cases, you start with a sacred circle. This is an energetic container for the energy that's being raised. Within the circle, time and space become very, very subjective and very relative to the person. And it's also a way to separate yourself from the outside world. Within the circle is sacred space, without is the mundane world. You can work with magic outside of your physical time or view things outside of the time frame you're currently living in within a sacred circle. Within a sacred circle, healings can be performed honestly a lot easier than when they're outside, just in general. And within a circle, people will practice in covens, spells for protection, fertility, and more amorous rites, as well as banishing negative influences or helping to bring prosperity to a group, a person, or a community. There's really not a limit on what you can do within a sacred circle, as long as it's for a highest good energy. You don't want to do negative within that, because not always the best decision. But I'm not going to go super far into the weeds on magic at the moment. That's something we're going to go into a later time, just more of the ethics of it. For now, there's 2 primary versions, and this is a way to kind of wrap that section up. And we have white magic and dark magic. Dark magic is associated with the left-hand path, evil and Satanism, demons, things like that. White magic is what the Wiccans and most ceremonialist magicians work with. It is for healing, health, prosperity, and uplifting. There's people who believe that there's a third option, but we, again, won't go into too much about that whole mess, because that can be an entire series on just those concepts. So we're going to continue forward here. There is some controversy along this story as well. Founders of the modern day movement claim that the Inquisitions and the witch hunters were completely wrong in the pursuits of destroying witches, that they were literally out just killing all the healers and herbalists that were out there. The claim goes along the lines of hunted persons were just pagans, and the church of the day wanted them all destroyed because they were not conforming to their beliefs. Again, not quite fully on board with that one. The other side of the argument is that the people who were being attacked were doing evil against others, up to and including unaliving people, children, and animals. The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. The Burning Times, the Inquisitions, all of that, Dark Ages, were real. There's no debate that that happened. Now, when we start looking at details, a lot of innocent people were unalived in that time period. I mean, a lot of innocent people, including clergy members. Yeah, the whole thing is messed up. Were there actually evil people in that mix that were taken out? More than likely. You can't have the amount of death that occurred under this banner and not have some of the darkness wiped out in the process. But the overall practice of the church and the inquisitors and the witch hunters of the time, tied in with the politics and the governance of the ruling class, were not on the up and up. History is very messy during this time period. History is very convoluted during this time period. It's a very dark period in history. That being said, shining light on it allows people to not repeat those crimes, sins, and violations of humanity. We need to understand, as people, what went on during the Dark Ages, both sides of the story. And in most cases, because the church controlled the record keeping, you don't get to know the other side. There are people who were able to secret the information through, so there is some records out there. There are some records out there, let's speak proper. So, again, the controversy comes through the fact of the kind of mess that was going on in that time. Was one side right, one side wrong? No. Was both sides in a lot of ways wrong? Yes. It was a mess. So, things to be aware of. Now, we're gonna look at some of the morals and ethics that are used amongst the modern day Wiccans, and this will kind of be where we wrap things up here, I think. Yes. So the practice of the modern day Wiccan is under a moral compass of "and harm ye none, do what ye will." Hello, Serge. And that may sound like you can do whatever you want. No, not even slightly correct. This little rhyme is part of a much longer poem or code called the Wiccan Rede. This is a moral code or compass about the best way to live a person's life. And I'm going to go over that in a minute because, of course, I have that. The term "harm ye none, do what you will" puts the full weight of a personal choice upon the practitioner's shoulders. The full thing. Personal responsibility comes to the forefront really quick. For example, are you getting mad at the person that cut you off in traffic so you flip them the bird? Are you harming somebody with that? You say a rude comment about a coworker behind their back, like, he, can you imagine so-and-so? Is that harming somebody? It's not so simple. Nor does it free you from responsibility of your choices and decisions within life. It actually puts the entirety of all responsibility for each and every person on their own actions and morals. it changes the tone of "and harm you none, do what you will," doesn't it? We'll bounce over the Wiccan read here real quick, because it's written in Old English, which is kind of funny considering where most people today believe that Gardner or one of his associates wrote this, so it was not Old English style, but it's "Abide the Wiccan laws ye must in perfect love and perfect trust. Ye must live and let live, fairly take and fairly give." So you're still being very honest in how you approach life. This is the part that people outside of the communities don't fully understand, and the people within the communities have a bad habit of abusing. So when you hear and work and read through this stuff, understand that this is a code of living. It's like the 10 Commandments in the Bible. It's like a whole bunch of the others. This is a foundational practice. There are some parts of this that go into how to do rituals better, but a lot of the codes and morals, that's on you. The next section goes through some of the practices. Cast the circle thrice about to keep unwelcome spirits out. So when you're casting a circles, it's always done in threes. Bind the spell every time. Let the spell be spoken rhyme. And if you've ever watched some of the old TV shows, the witches always spoke rhythmically. This is where they get that. Soft of eye and light of touch, speak ye little, listen much. Again, don't spread gossip. Learn, educate yourself. You have 2 of these, 2 ears, but you only have 1 of these. You're supposed to be listening twice as much as you talk. That's how we learn, and that's how the old stories were passed along. This stuff never got written down. Most of our original stories were oral tradition passed on through speaking. And that's what they're referencing here, so you can learn and you bring it more in. Reading something, great. Discussing it, hearing other people's opinions, you actually start to bring it into a way where you can functionally use it. Jostle by the waxing moon, chanting out the Wiccan runes. Again, this is ritual work here. Windershins go the waning moon, chanting out the baneful tune. Jostle is clockwise, Windershins is counterclockwise. When you're winding up something, you're going clockwise with it. The waxing moon, you're bringing something into manifestation. Again, ritual work. Windershins by the waning moon, chanting out the baneful tune. You're going counterclockwise. That's time for banishing, releasing, getting rid of things. When the lady's moon is new, kiss the hand to her times 2. So you're wishing the new moon and putting your intentions into that energy. When the moon is at her peak, then the heart's desire seek. That's when you get your manifestations. That's when you connect to the divine feminine in its fullest form. Heed the north wind's mighty gale, lock the door and trim the sail. This kind of goes into what each of the directions work with. Not fully, because the different directions have different elemental energies. When the wind comes from the south, love will kiss thee on the mouth. These are some symbols in old stories, that wives' tale type stuff, but it was fun. When the more wind blows from the west, departed spirits have no rest. There was a belief in most of the older religions that the west was the realm of the underworld. It was the realm of the dead. It's where the sun would go to die, so you've got that energy going on here. When the wind blows from the east, expect the new and set the feast. Sun comes up in the east, moon rises in the east. All good things come from the east. 9 woods in the cauldron go, burn them quick and burn them slow. Again, we're going into ritual work here. Elder be the lady's tree, elder trees. Burn it not or cursed you'll be. That's one of the old traditional beliefs. When the wheel begins to turn, let the Beltane fires burn. Now we're getting into the Sabbats. This whole thing goes through the whole calendar, basically. I just lost it. When the wheel has turned to Yule, light the log and the horned one rules. This is the oak and holly gods. Heed ye flower, bush, and tree, by the lady blessed be, where the rippling waters go, cast a stone and truth to know. So it's a form of divination. When ye have and hold a need, hearken not to others' greed. When you're doing work like this, you don't do so for greedy purposes. There's nothing wrong with wanting to, pay your bills, but doing so to hurt another person, that's where greed comes in. That's where the negative stuff is. That's not a true Wiccan's practice. With a fool no season spend, or be counted as his friend. It even talks about that in the book of Proverbs in the Bible. You don't want to hang out with people who literally do dumb stuff all the time. You want to find groups that help uplift, build you, and even with this thing, because the fool can trip you, and you don't want that. You are trying to grow and build, and that's what this is going towards. Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. Mind the threefold law ye should, 3 times good, bad, and 3 times good. When misfortune is enow, wear the blue star upon thy brow. And this, everything you put out, 3 times 3. Talks about it biblical, talks about Wiccan read. It talks about it in Kabbalah. It talks about it in Hinduism. It talks about it every culture. Whatever you put out, you're going to get in return 3, 5, 7, or 10 times. What are you putting out in the world? What's coming back? Because if you're putting out something negative, the things that are going wrong in life are not someone else's fault at that point. So, things to think about. When misfortune is enow, wear the blue star on thy brow. The blue star is a 6-pointed star, and it's not the Star of David. We're not going to even go into that. This is the star of balance. It's the star of the elements: earth, air, fire, water. And when I do my readings, you'll see over here in the corner, where am I at? Down here. There we go. There'll be a little symbol with triangles with different lines. When they're all lined up together, it creates a 6-pointed star, and that is a star of protection, not the Jewish Star of David, just so we're clear. True in love ye must ever be, lest the love be false to thee. Be honest with the people you're around. There's no reason for falsehood. There's no reason for lies. This literally is a moral code for life. These words the Wiccan read, fulfill, and harm ye none, do what ye will. The whole concept of this, the Wiccan read, and there's like 4 different versions of this. This is the one that's the most clear to me, even though it's written in Old English, which I love. This is something that you can base your entire life off of. Literally. With that alone, you can live a very moral, ethical life, and that's the purpose of it. This whole belief is not set up to be hyper-political, to start fights. If you're fighting, you are violating every word of this. So, again, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, there's been wars for paganism. Yes and no. And that's where, when you actually follow the principles, and I can say this to a Christian as well, if you actually follow the principles in the Bible, why are you fighting about stuff? Like, there's no logic to that. So, things to think about. This is not the only law, though, within the modern day Wiccan groups. Gardner espoused 30 or so laws called the Ardanes, Ardanes. Alexander took Gardner's 30 and added a whole list more, and I haven't read all of Alexander's yet because I just haven't got into Alexander's practice fully, and that he equaled out to 161. That's a lot of rules. Doreen Valiente had her own 8 virtues within the goddess worship that she did. The virtues were mirth, reverence, honor, humility, strength, beauty, power, and compassion. Compassion. And those were in her work, The Charge of the Goddess. And I've read part of that. I haven't delved into it a lot because she's much more focused on goddess worship in her practice. Exactly. It needs to be focused not for deception and division. The devil causes reasons to divide us. The focus needs to be, yes, exactly. Gardner, in his belief, practice, held, what is going on here? Held that the perfect masculine feminine pairing within a group were the only way for the rituals and magics to work. And I've read a lot of his work, and I have to agree with a lot of the modern day theories on him. He was just a hair bit on the homophobic side. He liked women, and I'm not saying that to be derogatory. In his work, and I've read a lot of it, the female body was such a beautiful mystery to him, and it's like, I get where you're coming from. And he was loyal when he was in a relationship. Outside of the relationship, because I think he was divorced once or something, a little more amorous, but when he was in a relationship, he was very focused on that person, and there's a lot of beauty that goes along with how he talks about it. The reality, though, of these practices is a little bit different. You can practice alone. There's a lot of people who practice solitary, and they hold representatives of balance within their space. You can use a white or a black candle. Some people use a statue of a goddess and one of a god. And if you are in a group, we all carry aspects of masculinity and femininity within our bodies. It's just how you present it in a lot of ways. And there are groups out there that are 100% same sex, and within that you still have a significant form of feminine and a significant form of masculine. I referenced earlier the Dianic covens. The goddess Diana in her pure form held a very interesting, unique balance of masculine and feminine qualities. Diana was a huntress, but she could also take care of the home. Not generally seen as 100% feminine or masculine, but she held both. So in certain aspects, having that the same sex aspect does work within some of the modern day groups. Whoops, where we go? There. Within these groups, I mentioned earlier, there are standard 4 elements used in almost every ritual: earth, air, fire, and water. Some of the modern day covens add in the 5th element of spirit. That was not one of the originals in any of the stuff that I've read from Gardner. It was talked about, but it wasn't like something you brought in. It just showed up. You called the 4, the 5th just appeared. And these earth, air, fire, and water are invoked or invited at the opening of a ritual and released at the end. And it basically, how this goes, and they make fun of it in a lot of movies, especially horror films, and it's the directional watchtowers. If you've ever watched the movie The Craft, when the girls are on the beach and they're talking, calling in and doing their ritual there, which was weird to start with, that's basically what they're doing. Like I said, they've been made fun of pretty heavily in Hollywood. Gardner gave the directions with elemental alignments as follows. East is associated with air, south is with fire, west is with water, north is with earth. Personal opinion, he borrowed heavily from the ceremonial practices brought forward by the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucians. I don't have proof of that, but when you go through and you read which one came first, which was the Rosicrucians and the Golden Dawn members, he has a lot of similarities in that particular aspect of his practice. So there are claims amongst people today that the directions and elements are variable 100% dependent on geographical location. Personally, I don't agree with that. The elements don't change just because you went from one part of the country to the other. So if you believe in that, that's fine. It's just it doesn't resonate with how I view this particular practices. Most of the covens, foundationally, celebrate the 8 Sabbats, and it's a little bit like the meditations and discussions I do on YouTube and Odyssey, which is the 8 Sabbats of the Wheel of the Year: Samhain, Yule, Imbolc, or Candlemas, and I totally spelled that wrong in my notes. I can't leave that, sorry, just my twitchy OCD brain here. There we go. And then you go into Ostara, which is where we get modern day Easter, Beltane, 1st of May, Letha or Midsummer, Lughnasadh or Lammas, which is the first harvest, the first week of August, and then we have Mabon, which is the autumnal equinox. So in addition to the Sabbats, within most covens, you have full moon ceremonies. Well, you have moon ceremonies, we'll call them that. Some do only full moon rituals, so they meet once a month, the night of the full moon, the middle night of the full moon. Others will do some strictly new moon, which is not a more common practice, but it does happen. There are other covens that literally meet every 2 weeks on the new moon, full moon, new moon, full moon, and then they incorporate Sabbats within all of that. So it can be very onerous at times, but it's also pretty interesting when you start looking at some of the beauty that goes into the rituals. Basic ritual practices. You start off with a purification of each person as they enter the sacred space. Then, once everyone is inside, they cast the actual circle 3 times round. You can't cast the circle. At that point, the high priest and high priestess will direct their next in line, so to speak, to call the elemental directions and quarters. There is a raising of power, generally through meditation, chanting. However, then there is a part that some covens do, some covens don't, and that's where they will draw down the gods or goddesses into the high priest and high priestess. Again, not every coven does that, so. But then there is, if they have specific spells or workings, this is the time for that. Then there's the blessing of the refreshments, the wine, cakes, refreshments. There's some dancing games. It's kind of a festive atmosphere after the work is over, so it's a social event at that point. Then they will go through the process of releasing the quarters. You don't leave those gates open. And then you'll draw up the circle, returning yourself from sacred space into the mundane world. That's when the goodbyes are spread around. Pretty basic religious practice if you're going to go into it, just because you have group joining, everyone comes together, you do your thing, and then everyone leaves. So it does seem like a lot, and if you're practicing by yourself, it can seem like an unbelievable amount of time. But when you're with a group and you've been through that session, it is so empowering, but it's also so beautiful. It's not structured like a lot of groups will have, but it is something that is eye-opening. I've been to a whole bunch of different religious ceremonies. The one that I have not been to and I want to for some weird reason is some of the Catholic practices, especially around All Saints Day. Just because I've heard that the ceremonies are unbelievably impressive. If you have the opportunity, and I'm not saying this to push out on anybody, but if you have the opportunity and there's a group that has an open coven and it's of the Gardenian or Alexandrian line specifically, find out if they do an open night where people are invited, because it's worth experiencing just once, because it is a different experience. It's not your standard sit down, stand up, pray, sing, go home. It's different. And then, like I said, we won't go too far into that one. Within the craft, within Wicca, there are basic tools, and you can take these as extensive and elaborate as you want. Gardner had a massive collection of this stuff. Alex Sanders had his own versions of it. There's entire museums dedicated just to the tools of the craft. There's that many different styles. But basics, you need 4. An athame to represent air, a wand to represent fire, chalice to represent water, and a pentacle or a pantacle, depending on how it's spelled, for earth. The athame is the representation of the Lord. The chalice is the representation of the Lady. The wand is the divine will, and the pentacle is the earth upon which magic is worked. It's where we live. So the 4 tools literally can encompass the entire ritual. You don't need much more than that. Again, later on, if you are interested, we can go down the rabbit hole into some of the other tools, because you can get into an elaborate level. Robes and crowns and headdresses and other forms of knives and swords. And when you start looking at all of that, when we go back to Gerald Gardner and how he had an obsession with swords and blades, kind of fits into how he incorporated it all into the craft. But basically, those 4 are the things that would most people would practice with. To join covens, and again, we're just going over some generals here, you would go through an initiation process. Generally, we would take a year and a day, and it's a unique dating system. 1 year plus 1 day. And they use that term a lot in a lot of the Wiccan traditions, and a lot of pagan groups actually use it as well, have nothing to do with Wicca, will still use the year and a day aspect. The first degree of most covens is the initiate. This is where you will learn about the coven, the basics of that group's practices. You usually are with a host of some form, so they're bringing you in, you're showing you around, kind of giving you an idea of what to expect. The first degree you can leave if you choose, you can stay in if you want to go further. But you're only the initiate level first degree in most covens is exactly 1 year, 1 day, and if you are not ready to join, then you're asked to step out. Not always, but that's a general practice. The second degree is where you will receive your coven name. This is where you actually join the coven. This is where you gain knowledge of the tools, their definitions, the workings, how to consecrate them, how to do rituals. This is where you really start to expand your knowledge within the coven. This is where they start to kind of work you into understanding the pantheon of deity they work with, things like that. And from second, you'll move into third. The second degree you can stay in for a fair amount of time in most covens. It's not sped through like the year and the day practice, but generally you can be in that level for a while. Then there is the third degree in the basic coven, which is the basic Gerald Gardner version. And this is where you could start to hive off to create your own covens. In my personal opinion, this would be classified as the high priest or high priestess level, where you've been through it, you've learned, now you can lead out and officiate practices, hand fasting, weddings, things like that. There are covens today that have a 5-degree system, which those ones you have a year and a day for each degree until you reach the fourth. The fourth degree is where you reach the high priest level and you can stay there as long as you need. The fifth degree generally goes into eldership, and that's where you're a less active role. Then you have others, and these ones are not as common, at least not that I've seen. I have run across references to them, and there are some books out there that talk about them. They're not as common, and that are the 7-degree covens. To me, you're just getting into that, how many levels do you really think you need in a group? So, and to me that gets into the ego titles, and that's where I start to question, what are you doing? But for basics, we're just going to go through I just went through the 3, and that's where I'm leaving it. We're not going to go into the 5s and 7s because they're basically expansions of the first 3. There is one other tool in most coven craft, and this is where we're going to wrap things up for tonight because this is already almost an hour long. So, and this other tool is a very personal tool, and I don't know many Wiccans who don't have one, and it is probably the most personal tool in their collection, and this is a Book of Shadows. It's so called because it's your book of secrets. This is where you keep your ritual rule book. It is the history of the coven that you're in, and most of the time when you're in a coven, you will be asked, or they will provide you with a blank book. It can be a few pages up, or 3-ring binder where you add more pages as you go along. It can be a pre-bound book, significantly sized. Think the TV show Charmed back in the day, and their Book of Shadows, it was this gigantic tome. Some of the older books look like that, so be aware that that's what we're walking into here. It is the ritual rule book, so you'll have a section in your book where you do rituals, you go through the notes. It's kind of your education, but you write it out by hand. So it's not you're not photocopying this. You're copying it in your hand from the original book. It also records the basic spells within the group, different components for things, the goddesses, gods, and spirits that the coven tends to work with. And in most groups, like I said, you would hand copy this from the original book, so you would go into your second degree, and that's when you get your name. Generally, your Book of Shadows would come along that time, and this is where you start to really understand, deepen your spiritual journey at that point. And basically, the person who's initiating you or guiding you or hosting you would be the one that would specify, this is the section you're copying, this is why, these are the notes, this, and they would guide you kind of through. You're not copying the whole book. I mean, some of these Book of Shadows that I've seen from some of the museums are 400 and 500 page tomes. You're not copying the whole thing. You're taking the parts that are the most important to the coven to be passed on. The rest of it can be like births and deaths, marriages, things like that. So you don't have to copy all of that. It's specific to the coven. So, like I said, that's probably going to be the last little bit we're going to talk about tonight, because this is already, like I said, an hour long. We'll get into a little bit more of this in a future video. And like I said, I'm not sure if I'll do it again this week or if it'll be a little bit later. We'll do a part 2 to this. And in part 2, we'll go into more specifics about the differences between the Gardenian and Alexandrian line, and a little bit more of the other practices. But for now, I think we'll call it there. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like on it. Comment if you're watching this on the replay and let me know what your thoughts are. And if you're new, hit that subscribe button. I also dropped a couple of books in the description. That one is by Gerald Gardner. It's the Witchcraft Today book, going over the foundation of how he came into it. Not 100% factual. Gerald had a flair for the dramatic, so there's parts of it where you have to kind of scratch your head a little bit on. And then the other one was written in the 80s and been republished a few different times, and it's more of a basic introduction to the modern day version, including solitary beliefs and stuff. And it is called The Truth About Witchcraft Today, written by Scott Cunningham, who was an amazing practitioner of the Gardenian primarily line. But he also did a lot of solitary work, and he wanted people to understand that this wasn't a satanic cult, it wasn't evil, it was an alternative to the mainstream. And that's pretty much how he described it. He wasn't hostile towards anyone else. It was just, this is another viewpoint. So if you're interested in a little bit more detail, you can check out those books. Like I said, I'm not going to get into ritual work, like specifics. This is an introduction to what it is, what Gerald Gardner and what Alex Sanders practiced and what they espoused, and basically what they brought into world consciousness in the early 1900s. So, like I said, we'll continue this at a later date, but for now, we'll wrap this one up. Have a great rest of your night, and I will see you in the next video.